Hi, Sadie.
I'm curious,
Sadie.
what do you
Hey.
do to try to understand the story?
Hi. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. A long time.
Of the compositions
Yeah.
would be.
Okay. We'll be starting in just a few seconds. Are you ready, Bob? Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm just going to go. My name is Stuart Papavasiliou. I'm going to go over a few of our Zoom protocols. So once the session begins here in a few seconds, we're going to take down the chat feature. And we're going to, throughout the session, we're going to keep everyone on mute. And of course, you're free to ask questions. So the way you do that is if you go to the participant screen and find your name, there's a way for you to raise your hand. So if you just go to your name and at the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little button that says raise hand and lower hand. That's the first thing. The second thing is we do recommend that if you hover over in the upper right-hand corner, you choose speaker view. You'll have a full view of Bob as he's presenting and then of the people asking questions. So Bob, I think with that, we are ready to go.
Okay, fantastic. So I think David is going to put me on speaker. Okay, great. Welcome. I'm really thrilled that you've all joined me today. I hope that everyone got a chance to read the email I sent with the link, just to give us some sort of platform to go from. I wanted to first of all thank Fix Music for sponsoring these 4 pedagogy sessions. Without their help, we probably couldn't do something like this. So I'm very indebted to David Friedman and Fix Music, and he's going to do a giveaway, which is going to happen about 9:45. And Stuart's going to pick a number out of a bowl, and that number will correspond to the list that I have of all the participants. And then you're going to get a score, which David is going to put in the chat later, so you can see what score you're getting. And I think it's a very nice touch, and I thank him very much for that. So I wanted to say that the questions that came in were really wonderful. And actually, there were many questions, and many of them had a kind of central theme to it. And that central theme, like I said in my notes, is, how do I teach a particular skill or component? That's fairly straightforward. When and in what order do I teach a particular skill or component? And that's a little bit more subtle. And that's also something I really want to get into tonight, is that kind of thing. What should come before what? Because that can save a lot of time if you can understand what the hierarchy of the teaching is about. And how much do you teach a particular skill or component depends on, of course, who's in front of you. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and make that clear to people. Um, I just wanted to say that I know many of you, and I know the kind of training that you have through lessons, through workshops, through teaching your own students, through bringing students for supervised lessons. And there's an enormous amount of information that you know. And there's an enormous amount of information that's available in this work. What's challenging always is for each of us to find our footing with each individual student. I remember Talbot used to say so much about, I don't like to call it a method, because she said when a new student comes, they come with so many different issues and combinations of issues that she has to start very freshly. And one of the images that I think is really powerful when you engage in teaching this work is not to view it like the teacher has all the knowledge and the student is there to get the knowledge from the student solely. That is true, of course, that's practically speaking what's happening. But right below the surface of that, there's kind of a dance that I want to explore and set up as a framework. And what that dance represents to me is, if the best way to balance a pencil on your finger is not to keep your finger stationary. So if you want to balance something and you want to dance with it, you have to move with it. Now, that's easier said than done, because when we move with it, we also don't want to get confused or lose our direction. So in essence, we have to hold two things at one time. We have to understand, okay, what direction am I going in? And how do I have to adapt this information for each student? So I like to think of the image as there's a student, there's a teacher, but there's really kind of a space in between them where the student contributes into that space and the teacher listens to what's in that space and can dance with the information. No two students will respond to the same words exactly the same way. No two students will resonate with the same images exactly the same way. So understanding the concept is very important. The creative aspect of the teaching comes when you try to reach that other person. You try to get them to feel what you know is right through what you see, and what you know has to be right in terms of the theoretical information. Another thing that Mrs. Talman said, which I thought was very important for all of us to take deeply in, was she said, always remember that a piano lesson is not a lecture. So it's not about just giving the information. And I remember very vividly when I went to a lesson, this was fairly early on, and I said, oh, Mrs. Talman, I teach like 60 kids a week. Most of them don't want to do this. And I said, and, I try, but they don't have much patience for it. They don't have much attention span for it. And she said, oh, yeah, I understand. She said, but if they could do it by themselves, they wouldn't need you. And I always remembered that. And I thought, okay, so that's my role. And she used to say, your job is to hold their hands and get them over the finish line. And that image was very powerful for me. And she said, look, I understand the situation, but if you reserve some time in each lesson to work with them on the technique, maybe they won't end up a pianist, but you're also doing two jobs. You're helping them play better than they would play, because in the traditional methods, we know what that produces. So they will automatically benefit because you have a structure in your head. You know what healthy coordinate playing is like because you're feeling it in your own playing. She said, but secondly, and more importantly, you will train yourself. She said, for every child that you get to turn their arm, you will learn something about how rotation works. And she always used to say, there are 5 million ways to do the rotation incorrectly. And the dedicated teacher stays around long enough to learn at least 499 million of those. So you have to dance with the process and know that not every situation is going to look exactly the same. But having said that, we can go to very specific things that seem to recur as problematic in the teaching, because the teaching is not just one straight line. So let's talk a little bit about what this evening will look like. So we talked about the importance of being flexible in your approach. I find that some students will follow completely and have total patience. They'll follow what you ask them. Some will engage, but not 100%. And some will outright resist. And the greater majority will be some mixture of all of the above. So when I sent out the homework with, determine the patience level, that really helps you determine, okay, how concentratedly can I do this with this person? Because you don't want the experiment in essence to be a success and the patient kind of dies, or the operation is a success but the patient dies. So you have to evaluate that student from several points of view. So I would evaluate a student, and I want to be clear, it's not about typecasting the student. You're there because you have information that can make them grow to where we don't even know where they can blossom. But for practical purposes at the beginning, assess a little bit the character. Do they have a lot of patience? Is this a child or an adult with a short attention span? Is this a very concentrated child? Now, on the flip side of that, make some notes about the level of coordination in their system. Are they highly coordinated? Are they mildly coordinated? Are they pretty much uncoordinated? Because that's going to marry together. I have to say that I've seen enough cases where it seems that the least patient sometimes have the most difficult problems. So when you get someone who has mild problems and is very patient, we should be very grateful for those situations. But mostly they come in combinations of all of that. So what we want to accomplish today is talking a little bit about designing an appropriate course of study. Not doing a full retraining does not mean the situation is failing. And I think it's really important to come from that place. If you're not doing a complete retraining with somebody, it doesn't mean that the situation is failing. Your guidance and the knowledge that you already have will make improvements. So I wanted to first say that you really can't force somebody to be patient. We can ask, but there are no guarantees. And I do find from time to time, I will ask a student, may I please ask you to please slow down? Or may I ask you to do that again? I try always to say may, but I'm not always successful. The following is to help us become more aware of strategies that impact the results better and faster. Also realize this, that the more comprehensive your knowledge is, the quicker and more accurately you are able to diagnose effectively and implement faster. So in direct relationship to the impatience, we all have to constantly improve our ability to diagnose accurately and implement quickly. Because sometimes you only have a limited amount of time or a limited amount of attention to get in there and make some significant changes. So we want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So what I was planning on covering tonight are certain essential issues of alignment. Alignment is a vast topic, and I'm there are a few people here who have, I don't know the degree of private study that they have, but the majority of you have had a lot of private study. So I'm not going to do kind of the first lecture of all the sitting and the positions and everything. I want to go to key places in the alignment that seem to be more difficult than others in terms of getting the concept across. So we have that. I'm going to move to issues of dropping. So I want to talk about some issues of dropping. Why am I talking about that? Because a lot of questions were about the rotation. How do I get my student to do the double rotation? How do I get my student to turn freely? How do I get the rotation implemented into a piece? How do I get it so they don't come back next week and there's no rotation? Those are very common concerns. So we have to make sure that certain steps underneath those movements are also being done well. Okay. I was going to touch on some issues of rotation. And as a natural outgrowth of that, I was going to touch on some rotary octaves. There were some questions about fantasy impromptu, and it's really housed in the ability to do rotary octaves well.
One minute. It seems Bob is hung up a little bit on the internet.
If we talk about alignment, might have missed a few other things. I gave an overview of what we're going to cover. Just quickly. Alignment, dropping, rotation, rotary octaves. We're going to see a video on a trill. We're going to have a live student join us at 9:30. And we're going to have questions for 15 minutes at the end. So first, let's get into alignment. The reason alignment is so crucial is that free rotational movements and effective movements are not possible without alignment. You can understand very clearly from any mechanical device. You have a seesaw, and if this is not positioned in the right place, this plank will not have free motion. You move it over here, and the plank has certain restriction. We operate the same way. We have joints, and things have to line up in particular ways in order for us to move well. So basically, the important thing to realize is if you have a student with a lot of alignment issues, if the student initially comes with a low wrist, if a student comes with super curled fingers, if their elbow is up, if the shoulder is pulled up like this, any of those alignment issues, it's not the time to start rotation. So what does that mean? try to make a correlation between anything that you're correcting and how that can be brought into whatever they're playing. Because it might not always be possible that the student will stop completely and turn themselves over to you and say, yes, I want to do the training just exactly the way you prescribe it. So there are ways that we have to make certain changes. Now, I would say that all of you, by this time, I supervise a lot of people. I really don't see people coming in with a broken wrist, either down or up. Those are really, I think, in the community, very understood. I don't see issues where the elbow is wildly out or wildly in. But sometimes that's where I want to start with one of the sticky points of teaching rotation. When we have the elbow in the wrong place, the rotational movement just is not possible. So where should the elbow be? The elbow should be in a place where you don't feel like the upper arm is holding up, and you don't feel like the hand is falling to the outside toward the fifth side. So that's why starting with a centering on the center of the fingertip actually helps determine where the elbow needs to be. Not much will go right if the elbow is in the wrong place. So that's why after the wrist, which many of you understand, I would check elbows. Elbows are a really big issue. If that elbow is a little bit in, falling in toward the torso, the up and down is never going to be free. If it's held out away from the torso, the up and down is restricted. And you can feel that. You can try it on your own self. You put the elbow out and you try to go up and down in the arm. You put the elbow in and you try to go up and down the arm. Now, I'm showing it so you can really see it. Students may do very small versions of that. Very, very small versions of that. So I actually think it's a good idea to step behind them, and watch them go up and down with their forefinger, hand, and arm like this to see if that hinge looks like it's in the right place. Okay. We know that if rotation is put on top of the next few things, it's not going to work. What are those things? If the fingers are curled. Now, why do people have curled fingers? Because they've been told, hold a ball, if they're a transfer student, or their image of a piano hand is to round it. So we have to be careful because the antidotes are not necessarily the solutions. We can't take somebody who's curled and make them have their fingers straight. So the best way I've ever found to do that is just dropping the hands by the side and allowing the fingers to be in the natural shape. Now, I have found one helpful thing, because what would happen very often is people would look fine by their side, and then when I'm looking at it at the piano, I'm seeing this. And we go back and they look fine here, and then they go here and they do it again. It takes a while for people to break those connections in their brain. Understanding it and doing it away from the piano is a very important step, but it's not the ultimate solution. So one of the stopgaps that I've put in with people is to come up to a certain position and actually study your hand. So they'll more likely not do anything wrong coming to about here. And study your hand and look at the position of the fingers and then put it down on the piano. And then they're very surprised that the fingers are in the natural curve. So very often, I think what we have to look for is, where do we intercept the message? It could be misinterpreted like they're not paying attention, but it could also be that neuromuscularly, they don't have that differentiation in the brain. They're thinking one thing and imagining one thing, but the body's doing quite a different thing. And this whole process is to sensitize the mind and the body together so that that conversation between the mind and the body becomes connected. When people have what we would term, bad technique or incoordinate technique, to a certain extent, two things have been disrupted. One is what I just said, the connection. But also the second thing that's been disrupted is the sensory perception of the instrument. The way the instrument ultimately is supposed to feel to the performer does not feel that way to people with these incoordinate issues. So we have a whole sort of challenge, because once we begin to change how they're moving, how they're lining up at the piano itself begins to feel very differently to them. So here are things about the fingers that I'm looking for. When a person comes in one piece, finger, hand, and forearm, we all know that that's the playing unit. And that's what we're trying to determine comes to the instrument. When they come to the instrument, here is the list of things I'm looking for. I'm going to show you from on top. No camera on top. Okay. All right. So when we come to the instrument, the important thing I'll show you here is that the thumb is not positioned on the instrument. Once the thumb is positioned on the instrument at the beginning, then you have basically twisting. So allowing the thumb to be off the keyboard but not resting down like this, that's a pull, allows for the balance to be over the instrument. That's what's important, that the hand and the forearm feel balanced over the pads of the fingers. The second thing I'm looking for is what I just talked about, the curling. The curling, if it's like this, nothing after that will go very well. So they have to begin to accept that the fingers have a natural length, and you put them on the keyboard that way. The next thing is stretching. This is something that's a little bit more subtle, but I find that the reason rotation doesn't go into someone's system automatically very often comes back to this issue. What is that issue? When we go to the piano and all fingers are positioned over white keys, a finger to each white key, that is actually stretched. Now, this is really hard for some people because that's what they're depending their keyboard geography on. They see 5-finger positions and they're lining the fingers up. Now, we always have to empathize that it makes sense in a closed logic system. Doesn't it make sense? If I have my fingers on all the notes I'm about to play, I can't miss a note. Well, that sounds very good in one system, but in the system of movement and momentum, it's actually a very big detriment. Once the fingers are opened like this, and it's not much. I mean, I'm not talking about overt stretching. Everybody sees that. This is a much more subtle aspect of stretching. So when you're there in the right way, you actually haven't changed the relationship of fingers to each other. Relationship of fingers to each other is neither crowded, which is forcing them together. Remember, antidotes don't work. We can't take something that's a little bit stretched and smush it together. So we have to find what it's like. Here are some images that I suggest in telling students. One is, the first one I would say is, imagine that your hand is inside of a mitten. Inside of a mitten, it feels kind of together. That's very different than a glove. A glove separates your fingers, but a mitten allows your fingers to lightly touch each other. And I think that lightly touching each other really, really helps. So when they lightly touch each other, this is the next thing I'm looking for. I'm looking for about 3.5 notes being covered. When 3.5 notes are covered, then there's neither any stretching and probably no crowding. If it's less than 3.5 notes for most, maybe for a young child with a really small hand, it's about 3 notes, but most average adult 3.5, something around there. Then you can be more confident that, okay, I'm not having to deal with that stretching. So once we do that, let's go to the middle knuckle. We talked about that. When it's in the natural curve, there will be a knuckle here. So if that knuckle is flattened out, then rotation is not going to work very well. If the last joint is grabbing and pulling in, that's the curling, it's not going to work very well. So there has to be a knuckle here. Which brings me to actually what I feel is the most delicate aspect of alignment of the finger, hand, and arm, which is this main knuckle. So this we call the middle knuckle, this is the main knuckle. The main knuckle is problematic and can result in a lot of trouble when people begin to do the rotation. And it's not that obvious sometimes. So what are the issues with this main knuckle? Let's go to what many people are taught. People are taught that you need to have a strong bridge in order to play the piano well. The result of that often, when they interpret that information, is actually to pull it up in an effort to have it feel strong. Now, that pulling up can be very subtle. It can be just the experience of slightly contracting and pulling it up. Now, what do we know about that? When the main knuckle is not in the right position, when it's slightly pulled up, then it's very difficult for fingers to lift well. They come to the extreme range of motion very quickly whenever this is manipulated. So let's talk about the opposite. Some people come, and a lot of times in the left hand, where this main knuckle is too low, collapsed. So let's talk first about this, and then we'll talk about the more complicated one. With this one, sometimes it actually helps to have them put a finger underneath and feel that when they go down, there's a knuckle here. The things that you have to watch out for when you go to correct something is what are the most probable things that people will do. People who want to correct something, they'll stiffen it. So you come from the relaxed situation and now someone's stiffening it. So they have to feel that it is just a place that stops. Taubman used to call it playing the game freeze. Little children would run around, and then when someone would say freeze, whatever position they were in, they would stop. So if this is the hand, when it goes to the bottom of the key, that's where that knuckle stops. It doesn't continue lower after it arrives on the bottom of the key. That's one thing that I would be looking for if you can see that this is not in the right place. So of course you're doing that on each finger, and you're solidifying what it feels like to be balanced on each finger and to have this knuckle in the right place. The high knuckle is very difficult because the high knuckle seems to get very ingrained in people. So it's like when you change it, sometimes it feels completely foreign. And it can be dangerous because if you change something from too high to collapsed, then you've created another problem. So how do we try as best as we can to get this knuckle in the right place? All right, what do we do first? First, turn the hand over this way and tell the student that there's a line inside the body that goes through the forearm and wrist and hand all the way to this knuckle. So prior to that, this feels flat. So in relationship to what it was before, this now feels flatter. And then they can imagine that this knuckle goes down to the piano. So you're balancing the entire arm more on this knuckle, which we call the middle knuckle, than the main knuckle. They still need a place of solidity and support. The other thing to do is to work a little bit in what I call contrasts. Sometimes, in a very simplest, little bit like Goldilocks, a little bit more, a little bit less than, that's just right. So what does that mean? So we take the hand, you ask them to open their hand, and it's that feeling of just being open. And you ask them to tent it, to make it hollow in here. So they're actually contracting. that is the raising of this knuckle. That is what that is. So when the bottom contracts, that's what's happening. This is too high. So feeling that, they can then contrast it with, okay, I'm not supposed to feel that. Let me just open the hand. Oh, that does feel flatter in relationship to what I was doing. So once they feel that, then when they drop into the key, that knuckle is in the right place to unify the finger to the hand and the forearm. If this is too high, the finger is never going to be unified with the forearm. If it's too low, the finger is never going to be unified with the forearm. So once you get that, you can talk about, I would talk about something very briefly with them if you suspect it isn't right. I find that a lot of confusion comes up when people think about down. Down is like a very dangerous kind of piano word because, first of all, it means something a little bit different to everyone else. And this question was asked of me, how do I teach someone to be down? So you can see everything we've taught about up to here is essential in having that occur. So I always look at the teaching process like I'm trying to bring the situation to the very closest kind of model of what it's supposed to be, right where the student can capture it. You know, us putting it in someone's body, they still have an action. They have to capture what you're saying either in words or demonstration into the feeling in their own body. But everything you're doing is priming the situation so they can have that experience. We have experiences like this in life. I often talk about the whole process being very much like riding a bicycle. We do learn parts of things, and we are instructed on parts of things. Those parts of the things that we learn, the steering and the pedaling, bring us very close to the experience of riding a bicycle. But there's still that little moment, that little transition from directions to experience. So a person has to experience this. When the situation is ergonomically set up right, they have a chance of experiencing what I'm going to say next, which is that the down is in the direction of the instrument and not in the direction of the body. The most common thing to feel down that I correct with people is that the weight comes down, but it also comes down in the direction of the body. Now, I'm exaggerating this, and people will not do it even half as much as this. Sometimes they can just be like this. I went down, but the weight is backwards to me. So what we want to make sure of always is the parameters here. You can't just say, move your arm forward, because people most likely will do a kind of thrusting motion. They'll go down and they'll try to play forward like this from the wrist. So the best that I can say is Taubman used to call it a roof over the fingers. When you go down, it's just that gentle roof over that finger. So getting each finger down with that roof over it is essential. So once you have that, now that might transpire over a period of time. Get what I say, get pieces of this and start to implement a solid piece. You know, if you see this not right, spend 5 minutes on it. Know where you left off when you taught it and where you have to pick up again. I always have the feeling that if even for a moment I can get a person's hand to do something, if I can get a person to experience something and do something, I have a reference point. I know I can somehow get it back there again. As you keep returning and you keep revisiting to those sensations will take over because the body actually wants to move this way. I was so funny. I was working with somebody and this has been all done remotely, and very good, a good pianist, but very isolated and very limited. And he very much wanted to do, you know, rotation and all this. So I did it with him, and we were talking about a passage, and I could see that he didn't have really the right shape. So I instructed the right shape, and he said over the end, he said, well, that's just natural. Like, it's like kind of funny. Like, yeah, it's just natural, but how we get there requires a lot of engineering in a way. So we're engineering it in order to step into that space where it feels natural, where we're not thinking. But that's on the heels of a lot of correct things happening. So let's go on. Small things to touch on. Just check whether the person is actively holding their shoulder up or actively relaxing it. That comes up very often. And, we're looking very much down here. We're looking at what's happening at the key level. Sometimes you have to take your eyes and throw them back, or go around the room or something, or maybe on the internet it's actually a little bit easier. You can see if there's really conscious holding up or conscious putting down. People sometimes interpret things this way. They read a little bit about the work and they keep coming across freedom, the words freedom and ease, and it feels so easy and it feels so natural, it feels so quote unquote relaxed. And they think that they have to actually add that dimension. Like whatever they're doing, they have to add also the feeling that they relax. When you have the feeling of relaxing, then everything really falls out of the piano. So going back to this main thing, when we go down into the key, the weight is balanced over the tip of that finger. Also, that's where the weight is. So the weight is not on that finger plus leaning on the other fingers. It's very important to establish this aspect of being in one place at one time. When you're over that finger and there's no weight on the remaining fingers, that's going to help enormously. What are the things people do? Well, you say that, and the first thing that comes up usually is that people do this. You told me not to have any weight in those fingers. Okay, I did. Now let's see if we can come to a more middle ground. So what does not weight mean? Not weight actually does not mean holding the unplayed fingers up. Sometimes what helps is telling people their brain is enormously intelligent. If you tell it to just balance on 3, the weight will only go into 3. The other fingers can lightly touch, they just can't be heavy. That's the whole point. But there doesn't have to be any conscious action to get those fingers away from the stick. Now, you're already primed. You have so many things here. This might, with a young student, this might be a 6-month course here in how to get to the piano. Each week you do a little piece of it. You do this, you do that. But you have to touch on those things so that when you get to the issues of dropping and then issues of rotating, you've stacked the deck to succeed. So if we talk about dropping, the number one reason dropping will not work beyond the issues of alignment. So we know in the terms of alignment, that sometimes when people get to this stage where you've come from getting to the piano and everything is very lined up, now you have to play. So you have to go up and down. There are many ways people go up and down. The first way that people usually go up and down is from the wrist, because it's been so activated. So it's possible to come up from the wrist and the hand is down. So then it's hard to see the error because when they land, they look actually okay. But releasing notes is just as important as playing notes. When we release a note and we break the unity, we're never going to move in speed very efficiently. So I recommend not doing drops from very high. That's never been very helpful for people. Just enough momentum to fall down to the key. So say a person does that and you think, that doesn't look very free. That doesn't look very easy. here's the first place I would check. I would check what happens before they play. It's kind of in the realm of the invisible. What does that mean? So as they're going up, the fear of missing, the fear of playing, all of those things results in anticipating. They're already tight in the air. This has to be very clear to the person when they go up and down that they can't anticipate playing. When they anticipate playing, those two things happen. Either the finger isolates and goes ahead of the forearm into the key, or the opposite, which is the other fingers will hold up. So it's really helpful, I've found helpful, to go through a few times of what we term falling up onto the keyboard. It's a kind of weird sentence. Sometimes you want to use a weird sentence because if you use a sentence that people really always know, they might not challenge what they already know and feel. You want to change something. So you might use something like that. We're going to practice falling up onto the keyboard, which is kind of funny in a way. How do we do that? We fall down a lot of places. But what that means is there has to be an action that just has us fall onto the instrument. It's a very non-thinking action. One of the things that can help falling onto the instrument is the whole notion that Talman talked about, which is imagine the surface of your nails coming in the direction of your nose. So when it comes in the direction of your nose, then you feel, oh, I can fall back to the piano. And then modify it. Don't let them come all the way to the nose. Obviously, that's way too high. It's the feeling. That image also helps another crucial piece, which is to be unified. Actually, it takes coordinating three parts of the mechanism at the same time. It is not really the ultimate unification to be like mummified finger, hand, and arm, like this. There is a movement of the hand. Patty cake is a very good way to get the feeling of that movement. When you do the patty cake on your, that actually naturally moves the hand up and down in the right way. Where is it become not correct? When the hand and finger move up, but the arm doesn't respond immediately. Those three components have to respond immediately. So going up and down will, in the right way, the finger, hand, and arm, hand has a movement, fingers are moving ever so slightly, can help people with the down. It's very difficult to get the experience of down when the whole unit is just frozen together. It is unified, and it would be absolutely my first step. So you want to notice, I go sometimes from the most obvious thing for the student. See if they can grasp something obvious and easy to do. Just pick up your hand like a drawbridge, finger, hand, and arm like a drawbridge, pick it up like a hammer, whatever image you want. This has got to get unified. But after that, see if you can get another level of unification, which is the finger, hand, and arm, each doing its subtle role. Finger, hand, and arm. Once you have that, you have really a really good sense of weight into the instrument. Why is that important? I will throw this out. These have been images for resting down through the years that, like Edna, John, myself, Mary, we've all used. Resting on a table. Very often, if the piano is too much of a trigger for some students, have them go to a surface. And, assign it. Ask them to videotape it on their phone and send it to you. Make sure they do it. Just 10 of these every day, like that. Anyway, you can do that. Resting on a table. The feeling of going into the instrument, Taubman used to say, it should feel like landing in clay. It should not feel, she used to say, like jumping off a table onto a cement floor. That feeling of really forcing to the bottom is never going to give somebody the right kind of down. Sometimes people can get the experience by clasping their hands gently, just putting hands together. In the action of putting your hands together, you can feel, oh, piano has certain properties and my fingers have certain properties. So that maybe helps in that way. Okay, let's move on. If you have a young student and you don't feel that it's appropriate to do rotation with, this is a very good time to actually connect the fingers in the walking hand and arm. So the walking hand and arm is an up and down movement of the finger, hand, and forearm. This is a basic stroke. And actually, Taubman discovered this much, much before she discovered rotation. The one thing that she understood was the finger, hand, and arm had to be together, but she didn't understand rotation from the very beginning. What she did was she taught walking hand and arm, that the finger, hand, and forearm have to be unified in an up and down motion. And she said many of the young kids discovered rotation on their own. She must have had some great kids. Mostly, I don't know that they actually discover it on their own very often, but it is possible. So this is the moment to do the walking hand and arm. So the walking hand and arm needs to have certain things, attention on certain things. One is that the motion not get confused. You can't play on the way up. This sometimes happens, that the motion gets confused. The playing is on the way down, and you can go underneath. I find that it's very effective to touch underneath the forearm and help lift them up to come down to the next key. So they're learning the skill really in a way of legato, because there is a connection, a timing of the connection between one finger and another. Now, many people say this is very difficult to do. I've found that doing a little exercise with them away from the piano clarifies it for them, and they like it and they laugh, which is this. I say to them, take the pencil. And as they take the pencil, I hold on to it. So we're now in a tug of war. And then I just say, take the pencil, and I make sure that I let go of it before they can grab it, and they laugh, and it's on the floor. And then I say, okay, let's see if we can transfer the pencil. And I take the pencil, and they take it, and they take it beautifully. So I make the point that if we're two people and we can learn how to transfer from one place to another, you're the same person at the piano, you can do it even better than we can. So then they go and they go, oh, when the one finger plays, the other one's letting go. And there's a kind of up and down motion of the hand and forearm. Some things to watch out for. Watch out that the motion is not initiated from the wrist. Once the wrist does it, then you have a broken mechanism. Talked about not reversing it, so we don't want to play and push up. So they have to stay down for a little bit longer than they think they need to. So I think that already can help, because you can add in and out motions to that basic stroke. It's not rotation. There will be a certain limit in speed that somebody can have, but they will be connecting themselves, which is the most important thing. And there is an enormous amount of repertoire. They can go really all the way up and into a sonatina without having to deal with the challenge of rotation, if that's appropriate for them. Many of them will be ready for rotation sooner than that. So let's talk a little bit about the double rotation, because I want to bring in the trill and also to work with the student. Okay, so the double rotation, in my opinion, is the most complex issue to learn and to teach. It depends on everything so far being done very well, and it will not turn freely if there is any stretching, any crowding, any pressing, any relaxing, all of those things that we've been talking about, they're all affecting the ability to rotate. All those things are fundamental to the rotation being successful. But say the person's been doing this very well, you feel like they understand this very well. I would start with those 4 fingers. The first thing that I would teach someone to do is to do a single rotate, to come straight down on the first note, maybe 5. 5 is a good finger. Then to roll and go over to the second finger. So I wanted to give you a few things that come up just in this very simple moment. A lot of people, and you don't always see it, they think they're supposed to turn, but at the same time, the finger's supposed to stay exactly where it is. In the learning of rotation, it's very important that the rotation allow for the finger to roll onto the side. That's very important. You'll not get a free rotation. If the fingertip stays in the same place, you'll always get this kind of struggle and force of the rotation. Everything rolls. Now, particularly remotely, I found this to be very helpful, actually. It is an exaggeration, so I'm not thrilled about it, but it does make a point to somebody, and particularly remotely, which is, I ask them to stack the fingers vertically. What does that mean? You're on 5, and you go to a place where your 4, your 3, and your 2 are stacked vertically. That seems to make it clear to them that the motion has to go all the way to the elbow. See, that's the most important thing when you're teaching rotation, is that the motion is free all the way to the back of the arm. When it's not free, it can look like a whole lot of problems down here, and then the teacher very often tries to solve what they see here. They see fingers sticking up. They see fingers curling. They see fingers splaying. But a lot of those issues might have to do with the rotation not being free to the back of the arm. So to make sure that it's free to the back of the arm, I ask them to stack it and then throw it to the left. The other thing that's good about that, it comes into the old Taubman thing of leaving all the fingers on the right side and letting the arm take it to the left. And I would do that on each of the distances. And it's kind of fun. That's a kind of fun thing. Going in the other direction can be a little bit more complicated. Here are a few tips about that. So when we go the learning stage of learning the rotation the other way, there are a few pitfalls. People try to turn, and you start to think, oh, they're pushing their wrists up. Why are they doing that? And you tell them not to do that. But then they can't turn. So the issue is not here all the time. The issue is way back here. So what do I mean by that? If we stand up and let our arms fall just by your side, and you rotate your forearm, you will see that your elbow goes to another position. And in that process, the upper arm is also following the forearm's rotation. When you do that, and then allow it to do it here, you're reminding them that they can go onto the side of the fingertip. They're not staying in exactly the same place. You're telling them to look back here, and you're saying, allow your elbow to let go as you roll. In the moment that I do that, I ask them to check something. Can you tell the difference between rolling your forearm and your elbow is coming along with you, and doing what we call the chicken wing, really initiating from the upper arm? Because if you're here and you start to see something like this, then you know that that's not possibly right. So, letting it turn over the finger and go a distance, and feeling like the elbow gives. It's a let go. It lets go, and it also comes right back into it. Same thing with the 4. Same thing with the 3. So by that time, if you're able to do that successfully, you now have the 4 fingers coming down You can add a preparatory motion if you think it's not too much for them. And at the second finger, you can now continue and go back up. So I'm going to talk next session a little bit about where to take it from here in terms of getting to the thumb, and then lots of things with the scale, and then next session, the application, and seeing how to develop it into the music itself. So I think this is a good time to start to look at the trill, if we can.
Great.
So we're trying to do this from YouTube, so be patient. We're trying to do a screen share from YouTube and see if we can get this to work. Okay, fantastic. So thank you, sir. So let's talk about what seems to be the challenge here. So the question from the teacher said the student can't do it quite fast enough.
But the truth is, it will drain a man's testosterone and cause his sex drive to plummet.
Really? Interesting. Okay.
That's a continuation of the Zoom, of the YouTube.
Interesting. Okay, so lost my train of thought. Okay, the trill. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about in that I felt that when the trill went to the left hand, it was much harder. When it's in the right hand, it was a little bit easier. So let's talk about the things that I would do in the left hand. So the first thing, we don't really need the music because it's not that complicated. Okay. This happens very often in a trill situation. There's a good effort to do the single rotation, which we know is going into the key and continuing and going back. But the thumb side seems to never continue. So to me, it's lopsided. There's a kind of rotation to the left, but not the rotation over the thumb. So in order to get that stimulated, sometimes it's very helpful to break it down into two parts. So you go to the thumb, and you do it in two parts. This happens first, and then there's a motion back to the second finger. And just get the person used to it. Now, what's very unusual for people at this stage is to actually turn and allow it to go over onto the nail. That's very foreign to someone. So they're trying to rotate, but they're trying it not on a conscious level, but a subconscious level, not to let it go over onto the nail. So in the first stage of it, remember, work from sort of the rough sketch and then refine. In the rough sketch, it has to go over onto the nail and back. So in that direction, usually what it is that the arm just doesn't continue. If you find that it does, the next thing that I find in a trill that's very unusual for somebody to do correctly right out of the chute is to incorporate all the remaining fingers in the same direction. They're so worried that they're going to lose speed that those fingers are not coming along. Now, this is a confusing situation because the brain is telling them they're rotating, and they are. They're just rotating on 1 and 2, and there's an inactivity in the unplayed fingers. So this is a very difficult pedagogical situation because I'm not asking those fingers to lift wildly. What I'm asking those fingers to do is unify over the thumb. So I will often ask somebody, do you feel when you go to the thumb that 2, 3, 4, and 5 are in the direction of the thumb, unweighted off the instrument? Or do you feel like when you go to the thumb, you can still sense those fingers on the keys holding back? And then what I find in the other direction is an improper use of the thumb. So when we rotate to the second finger, what can happen here is that the thumb doesn't actually participate in the right way. There were several questions about thumbs. So just wanted to kind of end the trill thing with the thumb by saying there are several things that contribute to a 1-2 or 1-3 trill not being good. Some of them are structural. If this knuckle, this main knuckle, is collapsed, you can't get a good trill. Likewise, if there's any degree of holding it out, of stretching it, and curling the last knuckle, that will cut down on speed. So you have to take a look. I thought in this video that there was evidence of the thumb being curled, actually. So what I want to say about the thumb usage, I find some key things helpful in stimulating the thumb for people. Turning the hand upside down like this and moving the thumb across. This is not exactly how the thumb moves, but it gives the person the knowledge that this part of the body is moving with the thumb. Very often what's understood about the thumb is basically from here down. This is immobile, and there's some kind of movement of the thumb like this. To get the whole thing moving, sometimes it's really helpful to tell the person, can you imagine like a drumstick? Let's see the drum, like a drumstick. And they laugh and they think that's kind of funny. And then get the drumstick to cross over your hand like that. Now, I wouldn't leave it like that. That drumstick has to be coordinated with the hand and the forearm. That's the hand part. Has to be coordinated with the forearm. I find it very helpful for people to define it, meaning when they lift their thumb, their forearm is on the left. If they respond better to counterclockwise, you say move your forearm counterclockwise and equate that to lifting. Drop your thumb and move clockwise. Counterclockwise, clockwise is the same as lift, drop. You've got to get those two things to speak to each other to coordinate. If the finger, remember, in the mind, it's a fast trill. The fingers are way ahead of that arm. There isn't even a belief that the arm can keep up. But we know that this is the fastest motion. This motion is as fast as the fingers. So that motion can keep up with the fingers. So that gives you a few maybe tips on trills, how to get the initial stages of the trill. We can go more into detail on some of the finer points of the trill next time. But see if you work it with a few students, maybe even make a video, we can see where it is, and maybe that will also give us the next step. So I wondered, Natalie, do you have your students on? Can Natalie unmute?
Hi.
Natalie?
Hi. My student is signed on. Her screen name is KN at the moment.
I see her.
Yeah. So her name is Kashama.
Kashama. Hi,
Yes.
Kashama. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
And she is in Texas, and she has been with me on Zoom exclusively since early July, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And just very briefly, piano background. Do you have many years of piano study? Is this a new activity for you?
So I think maybe learned the piano 15 years back for about a couple of years, then stopped, and then again restarted, now, so won't say much.
That's fantastic. That's so inspiring that you came back to piano after 15 years. That's amazing. Okay, great. So I just want to say a few things. So first of all, very nice to meet you. Thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate it. We're all looking, all of us, myself included, for the opportunity to learn and to explore in this journey. So hopefully we can help you with something. But more importantly, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, okay? So there might be more information than I would even expect anyone to do in the moment, okay? The reason that I'm saying that is there are some very experienced teachers here. So I would like to be able to give them some insight a little bit further than maybe what we're able to accomplish here. Just kind of like, you're doing this well, and then I can say several things after it, and you might not be, it might be too much information for you. So don't worry. There's no, I have no expectation that you should do everything that comes out of my mouth. Very few people do. So just know you're in very good company. All right. So can you tell me what it is that you want to ask? There was something about the double rotation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I think I had, for the past few weeks, I've been having trouble mainly keeping my palm facing down. My fingers would always be up in the air. So we worked on it. Natalie showed me a few ways and methods to get around it, and to pay attention to the rotation. So it's a little better, but I think sometimes what she's, and Natalie, maybe you can correct me. Sometimes when I do the rotation, it's, the double rotation, it's not enough, meaning I probably am not rotating as much as I should. And so when I do the single rotation, I mean, and so I think that was the main concern, is having all the fingers, not facing down. And there was some extra reaction when I was playing the scale.
Okay. So what's a good place for us to start? Do you want to start with the scale? Do you want to do 5 fingers? What are you doing presently?
Uh, I can just play the 1 octave scale.
Fantastic. That's great. Let's do that. Is there a way to move your camera so we can see the keyboard? Fantastic. That's
okay.
wonderful. That's really fantastic. Great job. There's a lot of good things there. Okay. I can see a little bit what you're talking about. Okay. So here's what I see. Okay. We'll have to see how much of this we can implement. Okay. So the first thing that I see is that the wrist to me is a little bit low. See, so when the wrist is low, it's very difficult for the arm to be as free as it needs to be because there's a break already. So can you just go into your fifth finger and just, do you see that my wrist is really, there's no dip below that this. So it feels basically on line with the middle knuckles. The middle knuckles are slightly higher, but and what I'd like to see you do is to turn and just go to the second finger. I just want to test something. So you're going to come straight down on 5, okay? But you're going to concentrate on maybe having the wrist a little bit higher. Okay, all right, so you're doing the preparatory motion. That's okay. Can you take your left hand and put your finger under your wrist, just your second finger under your wrist? Okay, good. Now, when you go up in the air, keep contact of your second finger with your wrist. And make sure that when you come down, your wrist is not pressing down on your finger. Very good. Very good. Now, one of the things that you have is a reaction in your thumb. See, I'm going to show you in the other hand. when you're going down, your thumb is pulling away from your hand. I'm exaggerating, but I can see it when you do it. So when that happens, when the thumb is pulling in the opposite direction, this can no longer move freely. See, the only thing that can work its way into an automatic movement is something that's free. It has to be free. So we have to look at all the barriers that stop us from being free. Okay? So let's
Okay.
go into the piano. I'm going to show you in your left so they can see my thumb. Have your thumb very close to the second finger. That's it. That's it. You see how you are there? That's fantastic. Do it exactly like that and go into your fifth finger. Very good. Now, it's very subtle, but I think you can do it. You're very smart. Your fingers are a little bit stretched. Can you get your fingers closer to your fifth finger? Now, I'm going to give you something to focus on. I would like your fourth finger to be positioned on the key that your fifth finger is playing. Is that clear for you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and now can you answer a question for me? Are your fingers closer to the fifth finger than they were before?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, now keep it like that. Turn. Don't let the thumb pull away. Turn. And now go to your second finger and let me see that. Very good. Let's do it one more time. Okay, good. Now, can we do one other thing? When you go on your fifth finger, can you stack all of your fingers vertically over your fifth finger for a moment? Okay, great. So that reveals something. When you go to rotate, what's happening is your elbow is coming along with the rotation. So your elbow is falling a little bit, and that's why it's very difficult to get it to turn back freely. Can you just take your left hand and feel underneath and just touch your elbow? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Now, your elbow should stay in the same place. So if we take our hand off the piano for one moment, the elbow should stay in the same place. Try to rotate without the elbow moving. So yeah, you'll do it in this position. Right. No playing yet. We're just going to do this. Yes. Can you feel the freedom of that? Let the thumb come with you. That's it. So yes. So I have a question. Can you now feel your hand? I would like your hand to turn with the forearm. That's it. That's it. Okay. Okay. So thank you very much. We can't do too much tonight, but we'll ask Natalie to follow up on a few things. So I want to speak to the whole group. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so I wanted just to briefly say, how do we? Okay, so I wanted to briefly say, what I saw was that the fingers were a little bit open. That already makes it very difficult for this to move back here. When I looked back here, I could see that the reason why the rotation wasn't as free as possible was because as the person was rotating, this is very common, the elbow is just falling in a little bit with that rotation. That will stop the success of the rotation. So as it turned, I could see that she had to do two things at one time, which was get the stretching out of the thumb, because it was like this, it was pulling over there. But the motion, I had to get her to feel what is it like to get the motion all the way to the back of the forearm. Stacking the fingers at the same time she held the elbow made it look very different to me. We didn't have a chance to do it several times. I would definitely do it several times and ask her how it was going. But she did have a response. So Natalie, those are, get the elbow to be more stable, okay? Get the fingers to be less spread apart, the thumb not pulling away, and the freedom of that motion. She can do this away from the piano a lot. Any questions now? I want to give it to Natalie. Any questions, Natalie?
So I just want to, so when you're just having her touch the elbow to verify that it's not collapsing in as she rotates, right? It's
Perfect.
not, you're not holding the elbow in place. It's just touching.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Just touching it to give her her own sense of a reference point. You know, we can talk about not letting the elbow drop, but that's a very difficult thing to feel. So I think you have to really feel it at the piano. I mean, if you were there, obviously it might be much easier. You would
Right.
just hold it and she would feel it. The other thing you can explain to her that there are two bones in the forearm. One is stationary and goes to the elbow. The other bone rotates around the stationary bone.
Okay.
Now, the other reason that I remember, the other reason why this forearm wasn't completely free was, and it sounds very odd, but it's very common, the hand gets left out of the turning. Somehow the hand gets left out. And this is what I've come to with many people. The reason is people are willing to rotate. People are even willing to move their fingers a little bit. But what they will not give up is the geography of knowing where those notes are. So they'll try to turn their forearm, they'll try to move their fingers, but they want their hand to know where they're going. And until they give that up, until they give up the control of the hand and let it go to a different place, we can't get it unified.
Okay.
And I found that as a very interesting kind of thing.
All right.
So
Thank you.
try that and see if that helps.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready for a drawing. So Stuart has a bowl with numbers. So this is a.
I do.
I only have the names.
I do. I do. I have a bowl and I'm drawing, and here's the bowl, and it's got things in there. So I'm drawing number 17, 17.
Okay, congratulations. That is Harrison Lavins. If Harrison's on, you can unmute him.
Let's see. Need he be present to win? Yes. Okay.
No, and you don't have to be
I'm only
present.
kidding.
I'm present, but I wasn't able to unmute. But thank you. I'm so honored. I didn't prepare an acceptance speech, but I'd like to thank the Academy and my teacher, Bob Durso, and thank you, Stuart, for the lucky draw. Thank you, everyone.
Sure,
And thank you to, is David here as well?
David is here, and he wants to show you what you got. I think he's going to do that. Okay, so in the chat, he has put the book in the chat if anybody wants to go and see. It's a great anthology of Black women composers from 1893 to 1990. Fantastic.
Wow.
New anthology. So enjoy, Harrison. Wonderful.
So much.
All righty. So now we have about 7-8 minutes. We can also go a few minutes over. Who has questions? You can type them into the chat. Or, well, no, you can raise your hand. That's what we're doing. Raise the hand, and Stuart or David will select you, and you can ask your question.
I'm selecting Natalie first.
Well, we had Natalie already.
Okay.
So, yeah, can we do someone else?
Sherry Weiss.
Somebody unmuting her?
I'm asking her to unmute. Sherry, accept the prompt, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm assuming that everybody is still teaching online, so this is more an online question.
Okay.
What do you do with a student that doesn't realize he has a problem someplace when it's so obvious? And I know what it is, and I say, or do you have a problem? Nope. And it's like, well, if you didn't have a problem, then you'd be able to play the piece.
Okay, well, that's very relevant because it reminds me of a situation I had, which is textbook of what you're saying. I would go to correct something with this student, and she would feel absolutely no difference.
I've had that too.
So, yeah, so it's like not knowing you have a mistake, not feeling a difference. This is not so unusual. The body wakes up to the sensations and the stimuli at different rates. What Talbin told me to do is she said, just keep correcting it. At some place, the body will kind of wake up to it and it will start to understand the differences. So I think, Shari, just correct it.
Oh, I do.
Yeah. Eventually, something will break through.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Great. We have another person with a question.
Bob, the only other person is Natalie.
Oh, okay. Everyone else is good. Okay, Natalie?
Yeah, it's just quickly, you mentioned looking for, at the very beginning when you were talking about the elbow, you were looking for, you said, go behind and look. Is there a Zoom friendly way to do that? Is that just the touching thing that we did with Shama?
I mean, you can ask them to turn in the direction of the camera and turn for you because that's where,
Okay.
we put their back to the camera
Yeah.
and, they can turn and you can observe it. It's
Okay.
so common. It's so common that the elbow, and see, you can't find the rotational movement when the elbow comes along with it.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Great.
So just have the person turn around. Okay. That sounds good.
Megan?
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, if you've got a student who's a transfer student and who's working on standard repertoire, what are some good ways of having them make sure that they're connected to the walking hand in arm? The dropping looks fairly good, but in connecting something when they're already working on repertoire, I'm really more interested in playing the repertoire than working on technique specific things. What are some suggestions that you might have?
Yeah, I think the best way to get into that is that we have to be willing to compromise, but they need to be willing to compromise too. So the thing that's difficult is to integrate something while the train is still in motion. It's very difficult to change things in someone's playing fully when they're reinforcing old habits. But you have to try. So what I have done sometimes is I just make it part of the lesson to extract 5 passages where whatever I do, they have to find 5 more. I did it with kids and I went bankrupt on jelly beans because I gave them jelly beans for every passage that they could bring back. And all of a sudden, when they were coming to their lesson and I say, do you have any questions? And they say, no. Suddenly I get these long lists and I'm, doling out jelly beans forever. So I don't know if that's as simple as that, but the point is that we are trying to encourage a transference of the knowledge. They have to generate that, because if the student remains passive and just comes to the lesson and just does whatever the teacher's saying, they're not really pulling the work toward them. Now, I think you can tell them that if we do 3 or 4 passages and you do another one, my student Theo just said, I never got jelly beans. Oh my God. Anyway, so the point is maybe just extract 2 very clear examples of the walking hand and arm and ask them to bring you 2 more the next lesson.
Okay.
And just build on it. Like you have something that's at the core of correctness and you're building around it. So you can't always do it the same way. But if you can get them to do one piece correctly, then give it time to settle in their body and see where you can put another piece in. Maybe you talk a little bit about the thumb. You know, sometimes it's okay to separate skills that are unrelated at the moment. Like you do a few drops, you do a few rotations. You teach them to play the thumb with the rotation. And then you have 3 passages that move into the thumb. And you just keep doing them. I mean, this is not outside of the technique because ultimately that's what we're doing. We are putting things in to stimulate responses. It is really when you stimulate the response that you've been successful. So if you keep hitting that body with the right responses, then eventually it's going to like it. That's what Talmud used to say, is that the pleasure centers of the brain like to move more easily. They like when something feels easier. So that's the uphill battle, but we do have that in our favor. Okay, I think we can take one more question.
We'll take from Rachel.
Okay.
Hi. My question is, you brought up something that I was going to ask, that comes up a lot. I'm finding with my students about they don't, even after we've worked on the basic training and they've played a couple of pieces, the issue that I feel keeps coming back and kind of popping up in different passages is that they tend to go back to kind of getting stuck with their hand facing down so they can feel where they are. And I have to keep reminding them not to do that. So I was wondering, at that point in the training, what would you say to try to get them to take a chance and keep rotating and not get stuck?
Just so I understand completely, are you talking about you've done basic work with them and it seems to be successful, correct?
Yeah, they can do the scale and they may have even played a piece, but then somewhere down the road, I feel like in the learning process, when they're focusing a lot on reading the piece and just learning the notes, their hand kind of stops wanting to, like there's problems related to them wanting to keep facing down.
When you say facing down, what do you mean, completing a rotation?
Like I mostly feel like I see it when like they don't really want to go over their thumb in a unified way because their other fingers want to stay on the keys and kind of hold their place on the keyboard.
So positioning.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, okay, yeah. Okay, great. So here's something that I think is very important for all of us to either implement or be very aware of. Whenever I'm teaching, I try very hard to be looking at the full spectrum of what's going on. In other words, I'm not only looking on at the obvious problem the person has shown me, I'm looking at the sub-levels of motion. And sometimes those sub-levels of motion, it's not like the person doesn't know it, but they're just not stimulated in that moment. So I try to, without really saying it, I tried to put them on some kind of maintenance program. Because I think what happens is people begin to play the music and then it's almost like they've graduated from the technique. It's very difficult to impress that you don't graduate from the technique. These are your tools forever. So you need a kind of maintenance program. So maybe giving them, like, try this for a week. They have to come in and they have to go up, note by note, increasing it, something like this, okay? Because there it's virtually impossible to position. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
So you give them that sort of thing and they become accustomed to doing it every day. You know, if they do 50 of them in the week, you know, you can, you know, acknowledge them or whatever. But the technique for a long time, even after it's right, it needs to deepen in the body very deeply. And the way it deepens is through the consistency of movement. If we do something right once or twice, that doesn't guarantee us the longevity of the skill. It's really over time that the deepening of that coordination becomes second nature. Does that make any sense?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So it could be very much that nothing's wrong. They just are not generating it.
Yeah,
It's not,
I find they'll do it if I tell them to, but
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, who gets up in the morning wanting to generate rotation? I mean, you know, it's a caused act, you know. So I think we have to help them. We have to support them. You know, sometimes somebody will get something right in a lesson, and I will actually make them do it several times with different focuses. Why am I doing that? I'm just trying to make sure that that motion got in. I did it more with younger students. So I don't want to go too far over. So we're now 5 minutes. So I want to thank everyone. Please be in communication as to whether this is meeting your expectations. If you'd like to see any other directions, I plan to change sort of the format. I'd like to do, you know, incorporate some passage work into different sessions. But I felt for the first session, what people really wanted to know is, you know, how do I teach the rotation and have it stick? So I hope some of the things I'll also send the recording so you can take notes of the specific sort of tips. I think they help. I mean, I've found over the years that those tips really turn the tide. And it's just about connecting it and getting people inside of the work. Once they get inside the work and they're generating it, then really it's such a kind of joyful experience because they're very clear what their problems are. They're asking you for help, and you have the experience to help them. So thank you so much. I will see all of you either online or at the next session. So have a safe month, and thanks so much.